Hey y'all, this is Dr. Nashlie with the Garden of Nash, and today we're going to talk about plant shock. So did you know that plants can suffer from shock just like humans can? Well, I got some examples here, unfortunately, that happened to me this summer, but we're going to find out ways to fix those and also talk about ways to avoid them in the future. So check this out. All right, so if you recall, this was the famous hornworm tomato plant. When I first started seeing my hornworms, I have a video about this, we'll link it above, but you can check that out. But we had hornworms all over this plant. Now before that, this plant was actually doing really well, and excuse the older marigolds down there and the lemon balm that needs pruning, but let me get my okra plant out the way here. But I want to show you all what happened here. So as you notice, a lot of these stems were cut off, and that's because of the hornworms, and they were on there just having a ball, eating up all the things. I ended up taking them off and just putting them back there in the woods, but eventually they ended up coming back. I'll show you that in a minute, but on another plant. But I was able to at least control them from coming back. So what I did once the hornworms were off, and it actually looks like there's some on there as we're speaking. There are actually two on there. I see another one right there. So what happens, and they're smaller, the ones the other time were a lot bigger. So as you notice that this plant, they just love it. I got this from a farmer's market, and it was growing to be really big, probably right before it was getting ready to produce flowers, and the hornworms that just got it. So that actually sends a plant into shock when you start to eat a lot of the leaves off of the plant, because plants use leaves to take the energy from the sun to put that back into the plant so that they can grow. And so it basically interrupts the photosynthesis that's going on with the plant, and so it can no longer, where it's used to getting a whole lot of energy, then all of a sudden it's getting half of that amount of energy, and that sends the plant into shock, and it can no longer produce. So what I ended up doing was at least pruning it, but as you can see, the hornworms are back, and we just couldn't win this summer when it came to the tomato plants and the hornworms. So we count this as a loss, but actually we don't count this as a loss, we count it as a learning, always learning new things in the Garden of Nash. So we're gonna move on over here. Our okra is actually doing really well. This is a pepper plant right here. And by the way, you can see these hornworms at night if you use a black light. You can actually see them, they actually glow in the dark. Now that tells you a little something right there. I'm looking here and I'm actually seeing another tomato plant. Now this one actually suffers from, I see another hornworm right there. They love the tomatoes in the Garden of Nash. I guess they say they gotta eat too. But what we're seeing from this tomato plant was really what we call transplant shock. So there's multiple types of shock. The transplant shock can be, there's bad soil. So we have another example of that in the garden where we had bad soil, we had to take it out, and the plant actually has to start over again. Now, fortunately, this type of shock is a lot easier to recover from. And so if you get the right type of soil in there, if you get the right nutrients, you strengthen the plant. We use things like magnesium. You can buy it right out the store, any store, and that strengthens the plants. Plants are made of magnesium, and so the more you do that, you can strengthen the plants. This is a pepper plant. We actually had hornworms on here too. And even though, and getting back to my tomato, I'm sorry I skipped this, but getting back to my tomato plant, it actually was growing pretty well when we transplanted it to have better soil, but when the rain comes, it brings the hornworms again, so they just kept on coming back. Even with my diatomaceous earth that I was using, you have to reapply that every time because whenever it rains, it's gonna wipe it all away. So even though we're co-planting with our Mother Rosemary here and some of our fennel, even the co-planting and the diatomaceous earth, you just have to keep reapplying every time the rain comes. This is another plant that underwent some shock. Notice that it was producing flowers. You can even start to see some of the bulbs starting to come there, but this one never actually finished creating any actual peppers. I think this was banana pepper plant because the hornworms got to it, and this was also a transplant, so it was experiencing double shock, just like the tomato plant over there. So as it was growing, you see that it actually did grow a lot bigger than what we had. It was right about here when we first transplanted it, and it wasn't doing very well in some of the garden tote bags because of the soil that we had it in. And so it was able to grow, so it was able to overcome the transplant shock, but wasn't able to overcome the shock from the hornworms, the photosynthesis shock that underwent. And so we're gonna keep this just to keep doing experiments and learning in the garden. But I'm gonna walk you all over here. Excuse the beds, we're gonna make sure that we update those. But now this was actually a successful plant that we got out of the shock. Now this was one that we started in some of those garden totes. Now we did have some issues with our squash beetles, which are on all types of cucurbits. I actually have some cucumbers right behind me. Actually, let me see if I can. Okay, look, there's actually some hanging in there, right there. We got cucumbers. We got Mr. B there. He's pollinating all around. We got the whole ecosystem here in the Garden of Nash. But this is another plant, a cucumber plant that I actually took out of the tote bag. It had bad soil. We transplanted it, and it was very small. It was probably like, minus all of this here, was just very little leaves there. But we are able to actually get this one recovered. We put in our magnesium, we added our meals and our other fertilizer, and we made sure the quality of the soil was a lot better than the one that we had. And so you can see we actually have cucumbers. We've actually pulled off a few cucumbers already from this plant. And even though it's small, it's still producing our cucumbers here. So I just wanted to give you all an update in the Garden of Nash about the plant shock, whether it was a photosynthesis shock with some of our pests and hornworms, squash beetles, or a transplant shock where you could also have root shock, where you have to repair those roots, prune those plants all the way down so that they can basically start over. And that way you can actually have a success story here. We're also going to continue working on our other plants as we get ready to switch over our garden from the summer into our fall plants. And hopefully we can share more tips with you here at the Garden of Nash. Again, this is Dr. Nashlie. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we can't wait to show you what's happening next here at the Garden of Nash. We'll see you next time. Have you started your garden yet?